A very happy evening to all. On behalf of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, I, Radhika, Associate Professor in English, extend a warm welcome to all the participants for this talk series celebrating Bard of Avon. Hope you're all staying safe and in good health. I extend my wholehearted gratitude to the management, principal, the head of the department, and my fellow faculty members for their motivation and support for this program. May I now welcome our principal, Dr. Vigila Kennedy, a distinguished academician and an able administrator. Being the founding principal of this organization, she brings a blend of scholarship, professionalism, administrative competency, and integrity. She has proven track record of being a visionary and an excellent administrator, which has made her to excel in institution building. So, for her excellent and meaningful engagement with academia, she was awarded the Fulbright Scholarship in 2017. Ma'am, may I request you to welcome the participants and introduce the college to them?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Radhika, for the kind words. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all the participants because we have participants from around the globe. We have 1,700 plus participants who have joined us from various countries. So, my very warm welcome to all the participants who have joined for this very special international series. This particular series celebrating Bard of Avon is being done by the Department of English of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science. My congratulations to Dr. Radhika and the team for organizing such an excellent event, excellent program in this very special week as we remember William Shakespeare. And we have a 3 day series, very nicely designed, very nicely planned. And today, obviously, we have a very important and a very interesting topic on King Lear in Shakespeare's Theatre of Conversions by Professor Paul Yaknit from McGill University, Montreal, Canada. And tomorrow we have another very interesting perspective, teaching Shakespeare in today's India, bringing the Indian context to it by Professor Panja, Department of English, University of Delhi. And on 23rd, we have another global speaker. Why bother now with Shakespeare? I think a very pertinent question because many of us, or many of the students at least, ask why should we study Shakespeare? And that is brought by Professor Ross King from University of Oxford, London, UK. So very interesting series indeed and very important for us as maybe faculty of English, as English professionals, but also as I think people from different domains because all of us have learned being under the British rule at some point of time. All of us have gone through Shakespeare either in the school or in the undergrad program or as a part of literature. So this particular series will definitely give us a very interesting viewpoint. And we are very happy that this is being done by the School of English of Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science. The School of English offers BA English Literature, and Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science itself is a very young, agile institution, though we are part of a very large institution which is 34 plus years old of our engineering group. But very recently we started the Liberal Arts and Science with a view that we should be very progressive and bringing in a very integrated learning process into the academic system. Whether it's engineering or liberal arts, we know that today we are dealing with humans, we are dealing with people, and especially when contexts like today, many times we forget that this integration or interdisciplinary approach, we lose context of that. So that's why we wanted to start this liberal arts We would encourage you to go and visit our website to understand us a little more. The English, the School of English itself is a very vibrant school, and they love to instill the love for learning for literature and language. And they do several programs, and they are highly globally connected with several events like this, with several professors and academicians from all over the globe are brought in, and writers, journalists are brought in to have such conversations. And today, to have such conversations are important when we are stuck at home, when we are within the four walls, or probably we are stuck within our district or within our state. So that's why it's very interesting that the School of English has brought out this kind of a series today for us to think back, reflect, and say, yes, today too, what we learn is very relevant. And to hear speakers from across the globe from 3 different continents makes it all the more interesting because different perspectives are brought in. So wonderful that the School of English could organize this. My congratulations to the team, and we really look forward to the 3-day series and many more such events from the School of English, so that we build this particular domain a little more and make it very relevant today. Thank you very much, and welcome all of you. And I'm sure that we will have a wonderful session today and for the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that kind words and encouraging and motivating words. May I now call upon Dr. Manjula Bhashni, the lead of the department, to introduce the guest to the audience, please. Manjula, ma'am, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Manjula Bhashni, an associate professor in the School of English, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, Coimbatore. It's really a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Paul Yaknin, Tomlinson Professor of Shakespeare Studies at McGill University, who is going to address us on King Lear in Shakespeare's Theatre of Conversion. Dr. Yaknin has published widely on early modern literature and culture in England, and he has been rewarded and with honors, distinguished fellowships, and research grants. He is also the director of Trace McGill Project, which allowed him to work on projects like Early Modern Conversions and Making Publics Project. His ideas about the social life of art were featured on the CBC Radio Idea series as the origins of the modern public. He has also served as the president of the Shakespeare Association of America for the year 2009-2010. He has published non-academic essays about Shakespeare and modern life, including titles such as Sexual Justice and Tragedy as a Way of Life. He was a lead author of the white paper on the future of the PhDs in the humanities. For the past 8 years, he has been working on higher education practice and policy, and he is presently leading Trace McGill, which is tracking the career pathways of more than 5,000 PhD grads from across all the faculties at McGill. Welcome, Dr. Paul Yaknin. We are eager to listen to you.
It is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhashni. Thank you also to Dr. Radhika for making it possible for me to come to you from the other side of the world. Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. Thank you, Dr. Karthik. It is a great pleasure to be here. What I'm going to do today is to talk about Shakespeare's theater of conversion with a focus on King Lear. I should say that conversion doesn't necessarily mean, in my thinking, conversion from secular life to religion, or from one religion to another. It's much broader than that. And I also want to talk about how Shakespeare gathered his works from the books he read and from the life he was living with other people at the time. One of the things that I'm going to argue is that one of the most important things, perhaps the most important social fact in Shakespeare's lifetime, was conversion, because as you might know, he was living through a period a critical period in the history of religion in his country. His country had gone back and forth between Catholicism and Protestantism a number of times in the 16th century. What he did was to produce a creative and critical set of representations of conversion, and bequeathed to modernity a secularized version of conversion that I will talk about. He also, I think, contributed very significantly to the creation of a conversional canon, a literary canon that is all about change. It's all about rewriting the works of the past, making them different. So whereas you will hear arguments that the literary canon, especially the Western literary canon, is the bearer of defunct and outmoded and retrograde ideology, I believe, in fact, it is the place where culture and humankind works through all the difficult problems they face. Before I begin, let me just wish everybody who is listening to me a wish for their health and safety and the safety of their loved ones. We are going through an incredibly difficult time in our lives. It is wonderful that we have the initiative to organize events such as this. Okay, I'm going to begin. I want to argue today that throughout his career as a professional playwright, Shakespeare wrote plays that redescribed religious conversion in domestic, sexual, political, romantic, zoomorphic, and social registers. And I should say that the kinds of things that I have to say today owe a great deal. And tell me now if you can see this. I owes a great deal to the colleagues who took part in the Early Modern Conversions project. This is a project that included scholars from a variety of disciplines from 7 different countries, artists as well, thinking about different forms of radical transformation in early modernity, which for us means about 1400 up to about 1700. And the kinds of thinking that I'm doing today owes a very great deal to the members of this project. The project, as you know, the paper I'm presenting, King Lear and Shakespeare's Theatre of Conversion. I want to argue along these lines. His transformation of conversion was of a piece with an expanding early modern vocabulary, including words such as transection, which means a turning or passing from one sex to another, transfeminite, to turn from woman to man or from one sex to another, and transspeciate, to change kind or form, to change from human to animal. Like these new words, which can make us see things differently, Shakespeare's redescriptions of conversion enabled his plays to think critically and creatively about multiple sectors of the world, all the way from the private home to the space of the city, to the monarchical nation state, to faraway haunted islands, to the vast stage of the natural world. Shakespeare's transformations of conversion were integral to the drama he created and crucial for that drama's influence in his own time and over the long term. Here is a sampling of Shakespeare's inventiveness. In The Taming of the Shrew, he took up the issue of forced conversion, a brutal fact of life in early modernity across Europe, England, and the Americas, and resituated it in the domestic sphere. Catherine's profession of her newfound faith in patriarchy at the end of the play turns out to be, like countless other professions of faith in the period, in the real world, an utterance that cannot be credited at face value, and that therefore draws our attention to what we cannot see when we look at her face. Shakespeare brought conversion to center stage in the second tetralogy, the Henry IV plays and Henry V, even pushing it into plain view, as he used it to think about how a leader like Prince Hal, who goes on to become Henry V, is able to deploy conversion primarily as a narrative of charismatic legitimation rather than as a narrative of salvation. In a recent essay, Helen Smith from the University of York in England turns to Much Ado About Nothing to explore what she calls the relationship between religious and romantic love and the kinds of emotional experience captured but also forged within the trope of love as conversion. That's Helen Smith. In Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare puts human exceptionalism, the idea that humans are somehow different kinds of creatures from other animals, puts human exceptionalism in question by stirring together Ovid, Apuleius, and Paul, that's Paul from the Bible, and by creating a hybrid creature as the bearer of a beatific vision that can belong only to the ass in the man and not to the man himself. Remember what Bottom says. He says, I have had a dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Since I seem to be possessed by an idea about Shakespeare and conversion, I come to you today with two principal goals. One is to invite you to see that it is Shakespeare's imagination and not mine that makes me claim that he created a conversional theater, or at least that it is both his and my imagination working together. Two is to sketch out what Shakespeare did with religious conversion. My key texts are King Lear and The Tempest. Lear will be the centerpiece. In what follows, 1, I'm going to say something about what conversion is. 2, I will outline the early modern crisis of conversion in England and Europe and how Shakespeare's drama became what it is by repurposing religious conversion. 3, I'll focus on the remarkable rethinking of the sacred in King Lear. Toward the end of what I have to say today, I will, 4, tell you about a particular performance of The Tempest in order to say something about the world of conversion that Shakespeare has bequeathed to us and what we and others have made of that bequest. 1, what is conversion? Conversion is a transformative reorientation of the self toward a higher order of being. The higher order might be imagined as God, or it might be embodied in a person or in some other being or thing. We tend to use the words conversion and transformation interchangeably, but it is important to note that the two words designate two different kinds of event. Conversion has its basis in physical movement. A conversion is, quote, a turning in position, direction, destination. That's from the Oxford English Dictionary. Transformation often involves some kind of motion, but it is not movement-based, whereas conversion is a process of reorienting oneself within a field of things, persons, practices, and discourses in terms of hearing, seeing, speaking, feeling, thinking, and touching. That makes it strongly body-based. So conversion is an embodied and spatial practice. It is also a spatial practice that changes the character of the space in which it unfolds, transforming a neutral spatial surround into a meaningful place, as someone like Donne does in the poem Good Friday 1613, Riding Westward, which I'll talk about in a moment, or as Antony in Antony and Cleopatra does when he turns to embrace Cleopatra and declares, here is my space. Kingdoms are clay, our dungy earth alike feeds beast as man. The nobleness of life is to do thus. Conversion differs from transformation also because of its capacity to organize time backwards and forwards in relation to the moment of turning toward a higher order of being. A convert like St. Augustine tells the story of his life in the Confessions differently because of the revelatory experience in the garden. It's the garden in Milan. All his wanderings, fallings, sufferings become necessary parts of an organized narrative leading up to the time-shaping child's cry of Tolle lege. Pick it up, read it, is what the child is shouting. And his reading of the passage from Romans, for instantly, Augustine tells us, as the sentence ended, there was infused in my heart something like the light of full certainty, and all the gloom of doubt vanished away. The moment of conversion changes him by transforming his past into wanderings away from and then back to his true home, and fashioning his future life into an evangelical mission oriented around a pole star dialogic relationship with God, a relationship where speaking with God guarantees Augustine's substantial meaning and value. So conversion is different from transformation also because it is dialogical. Antony shifts his body and his speaking back to Cleopatra after his grand renunciation of rule. In a sense, conversion takes place in the space between conversation partners. And as such, it is a socially creative event, something that changes the character of social relations. Where the conversion is directly religious, the conversion with God seems to need to branch out into a larger human community. Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus, where he is knocked from his horse and becomes the missionary Paul, that conversion brings Ananias and Barnabas into the picture as the converts' authenticating supporters, thereby strengthening the small community of Christ's followers. Conversions rooted in person-to-person conversations with no clearly divine voice, which is the usual case in Shakespeare, have a similar tendency to ramify outward to others. When Antony pays his heart for what his eyes eat only, he initiates a chain reaction that grasps the heart of the down-to-earth Enobarbus, enchants Caesar's lieutenant Dolabella, and even to some degree captures Caesar himself in what he calls, with unknowing Christian resonance, the Queen's strong toil of grace. On this account, conversion is a powerful psychological agent of public making. Finally, conversion is a turning toward the other that realizes the self or the soul. To be, on this account, is to be seen by the other and to see oneself being seen. For now we see through a glass darkly, Paul says, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. That's Paul. That the interanimating mutual recognition with God cannot happen now, according to Paul, but only then, reminds us that while coming face to face with the sacral other can realize ourselves or our souls, it can also reveal our moral ugliness to ourselves, which we see being seen and known in the look of repugnance that we see on the face of the beloved other. So that moment of precious mutual recognition that can save us can also destroy us. John Donne, the great English poet and divine, puts this beautiful and fearful dynamic perfectly. Here's a piece of his poem. He puts it perfectly in Good Friday 16:13. Note in these stanzas from the poem, note the turn away because he cannot look at the crucified Christ and cannot be seen looking, and then the turn back only once he has been made fit for the eyes of God. Could I behold that endless night, which is zenith to us and our antipodes, humbled below us, or that blood which is the seat of all our souls, if not of his, made dirt of dust, or that flesh which was worn by God for his apparel, ragged and torn. O Savior, as thou hangst upon the tree, I turn my back to thee but to receive corrections, till thy mercies bid thee leave. O think me worth thine anger, punish me, burn off my rusts and my deformity, restore thine image so much by thy grace, that thou mayest know me, and I'll turn my face. Now, am I back with you visibly?
Yes, Professor, we can see you.
Great, thank you.
All this time we were not able to see your slides.
Okay, I will skip the slides.
Okay, okay.
I won't take the time to describe what I'm showing you. Thank you.
Fine.
Though he does not take account of the Pauline genealogy, the American philosopher Stanley Cavell told us some time ago that the same dynamic obtains in King Lear. Lear's dominating motivation in the opening scene, he says, this is Cavell, is to avoid being recognized. As Cavell also tells us, Lear's revelation of self comes only when he acknowledges the daughter he had at the start of the play, driven out of his sight, meaning, of course, that he expelled her. I'm talking about Cordelia, of course. He expelled her from his field of vision, and also that he closed out the possibility that she could see him in his spectacular display of vanity and rage. The embodied space and movement-based, time-shaping, dialogical, socially creative, and self-realizing character of conversion makes theater the perfect conversional art. Actors are by profession what we might call artists of conversion. The theater that preceded Shakespeare's, which included the great Corpus Christi cycles and allegorical plays such as The Castle of Perseverance and Youth, was itself a conversional drama within the boundaries of the Catholic faith. By virtue of both its basic character as an artistic mode and its history through to the 16th century as a church and guild-sponsored practice, the dramatic resources that Shakespeare inherited were perfectly suited to the changes he worked upon them, needing only the catalysts of social and political crisis and marketplace opportunity, together with his particular genius for the dramatic art of conversion. 2, the crisis of conversion and the emergence of the commercial theater. The primary factor that created the crisis was that conversion became a sublime instrument of power, a way for rulers to exercise control over the inward as well as the outward lives of their subjects, and also a justification of wars of conquest dedicated to converting whole new populations to Christian rule, or through the period of the Reformation to the true form of Christian rule. The state exercise of conversional power extended from the Reconquista in Spain to the European conquest of the Americas to the social, political, and military struggles that swept across Northern Europe and the British archipelago. One problem with conversion as an instrument of power is that it is difficult to police the inward beliefs of people. Spanish Christian authorities could never be sure the conversions they had compelled their formerly Muslim and Jewish subjects to undergo would stick over the long run. The focus on inwardness also provided a strong foundation for conscientious resistance to state power, whether the resistor was a public figure such as Thomas More, or a private person like Shakespeare's daughter Susanna, a recusant Catholic who resisted the Jacobean oath of allegiance in 1606. An oath designed to penetrate to the hearts of oath takers by requiring them to swear their allegiance, quote, without any equivocation of the crisis, without any equivocation or mental evasion or secret reservation whatsoever, unquote. A second factor in the emergence of the crisis was the convergence of the policing of consciences and the growth of an activist press and a politicized theater, a situation that made things harder for individuals like Susanna Shakespeare and the entire political community. Through the century, as the nation switched back and forth between the Church of Rome and the English Church, writers, printers, and government authorities conducted skirmishes around the printing and circulation of polemical texts on both sides. The Catholic Corpus Christi psychodrama was, of course, suppressed by the Protestant authorities. Perhaps more pertinent for the emergence of Shakespeare's conversional theater was the Elizabethan state suppression of the use of players of high-ranking aristocrats to promote their own religious and political views. In the first year of her reign, 1559, Elizabeth had a proclamation published that moved to exclude the players from what people were just beginning to discern was a burgeoning public sphere. The proclamation instructed civic officers across England not to permit the performance of plays, quote, wherein either matters of religion or of the governance of the estate of the commonweal shall be handled or treated, unquote. Great artists treat obstacles as opportunities. That is what Shakespeare and his fellow theatrical practitioners set out to do. They were, in any case, not the players that the Queen had in mind in her 1559 proclamation. They represented a new generation of artists who, while still in livery to high-ranking members of the court, had nevertheless begun in the 1570s to cultivate a new collective identity by building permanent public playhouses in London and by developing an altogether new mode of theatrical entertainment that was able to repackage what the Queen had called matters of religion or of the governance of the estate of the commonweal. On account of these new conditions of theatrical production and new kinds of plays, Shakespeare and his fellows were able to address matters of public concern without, for the most part, incurring the displeasure of the government. A key matter of public concern was conversion. Confessional identity and the question of conversion were at the center of early modern English social, religious, and political life. Conversion affected almost every man and woman in England from early in the 16th century until well after Shakespeare's death. In addition to his daughter and also possibly his father, we know that people he knew well, like Ben Jonson and Christopher Marlowe, were also at times in danger because of their conversions against the state-sponsored religion. Others who converted from the so-called old religion, that is Catholicism, to the Church of England were often thought to be mere opportunists. Shakespeare mined the resources of problematized conversion across his whole canon. Consider how Prince Hal differs from his predecessor in the famous victories of Henry V. This is an earlier play that Shakespeare borrowed from. Prince Henry in the earlier play is a thoroughgoing delinquent until his conscience wakes him up and changes him into the figure of princely virtue who will go on as Henry V to conquer France. His conversion is transparent. "Good my lord," he says at the end of the scene of transformation, "no doubt, but this day, even this day, I am born new again," unquote. Shakespeare's characterization of Hal deepens him into something like a real person who confronts us with a hard-to-fathom inwardness. Shakespeare's technical innovation is simple. It turns on the problem of Hal's conversion, a problem shared by thousands of Shakespeare's fellow Englishmen and women. Hal tells us at the start that he is acting the part of a delinquent. He says that he is taking on the role so that his reformation at some point in the future, quote, "shall show more goodly and attract more eyes," unquote. In the face of Hal's setting up his own conversion story, how can we ever know if his conversion, when at last it seems to come, is a real thing or a mere piece of political theater? Beyond enabling his remarkable innovations in characterization, the long-term controversy around conversion made it possible for Shakespeare to get hold of conversion itself as an object of study and as an analytical resource, which he made use of in the Second Tetralogy and in many other of his plays. Among these plays, King Lear is the most radical. It is the one that comes closest to emptying conversion entirely of its sacred character and therefore nullifying it, making it not conversion at all, but merely everyday change. As we will see, however, the reformation of conversion in King Lear amounts not to nullification, but rather to something like the naturalization of grace. 3. Lear's conversions of kind. Conversion, as we have heard, is a reorientation of the self toward a higher order of being. Kind means the natural character of a creature, and it refers more generally to nature. So also what Montaigne calls, in John Florio's 1603 translation, the general throng, all the animals, human and non-human. Kind also means naturally well-disposed, having a gentle, sympathetic, or benevolent nature, ready to assist or show consideration to others. That's from the Oxford Dictionary. Conversions of kind, like religious conversions, are turnings toward the good, but conversions of kind are founded in embodied human animality rather than achieved by transcending the bodily and dispositional features that make us kin with what Genesis calls the fish of the sea, the fowl of the heaven, the beasts, and everything that creepeth and moveth on the earth. King Lear is filled with Christian language and feeling, but it pushes hard against central Christian ideas about providence, sin, and redemption and salvation. The conversions of the play are as transformative as they are for Saul on the road to Damascus, or Augustine or Martin Luther, but they are not turnings toward God. Instead, they are reorientations of the self toward other people, or even toward dogs, worms, or flies. By virtue of turning toward the other, the soul of the convert is realized in such a way as to confer value and meaning on the convert's life under the aspect of eternity. While Shakespeare's idea of the soul has links to traditional thinking, it nevertheless amounts to a radical rethinking of the soul, with connections going back to Lucretius and forward to Spinoza. Because in the play, conversional ensoulment is of a piece with embodied life in nature, the soul that is realized by the movement of conversion is not eternal. This is very radical, of course, in Shakespeare. It dies with the convert. Shakespeare could hardly have made the mortality of the soul clearer when at the end of the play, the dead as earth body of the salvific figure Cordelia becomes the Pieta-like centerpiece in a spectacle of death that the Earl of Kent calls the final day, that is, Judgment Day, the moment when the meaning and value of all people will be assessed and authenticated forever. On this account, King Lear is a play that makes a signal contribution to the emergence of secular modernity. It does that not by imagining a world empty of religious feeling or thinking, but rather by reframing conversion and the human in natural terms. I am thinking of the secular here along the lines of philosopher Charles Taylor's idea of secularization as a pluralization of belief possibilities, rather than as either an eradication of religion or as a hiving off of religion from other areas of thought and practice. King Lear is not anything like a full-throated Christian play, but its naturalization of conversion and its concomitant rendering of an incommensurably higher good as immanent in animal life is far from the usual modern view of the play as a wholesale nihilistic rejection of the divine. King Lear inducts its audiences into thinking with animals. Because they are not always symbols, but have their own ways of being, animals can become conversation partners with the human animals in the play, like the mouse that is about nothing except its own mousy hunger. Lear, remember, offers it a piece of imaginary toasted cheese, or the small gilded fly whose robust love life puts in question the traditional standards of sexual morality, or the dog whose continuing vitality enforces the deathliness of Cordelia at the end of the play. The play also teaches us to think at the level of human animality, think with noses, ears, hands, naked skin, and the bruised and broken body, rather than only at the level of language and logic. When Regan says that Gloucester can smell his way to Dover, she means that his blinding has made him helpless and degraded him to the state of an animal. But in the play, noses with their capacity to smell the bad odor of sycophancy become primary instruments of socio-political analysis. To take one instance, Lear tells Gloucester that his disabling experience in the storm has enabled his olfactory discernment, allowing him to smell out the hypocrisy of those who had flattered him when he had power. Remember what he says, when the thunder would not peace at my bidding, there I found him, there I smelt him out. Go to, they are not men of their words. Characters come to know themselves, others, and the world better once they put aside the usual civilized ways of understanding and judging, which tend to operate within a highly regulated verbal and visual field, a field painfully operative in the opening scenes of the play. The play develops a choreography of touching, embracing, and carrying that begins in the storm and grows through a series of reported and performed scenes, including Lear's testing by touch of the wetness of Cordelia's tears, until it culminates in his experience of bearing the weight of her body. And if you look at the texture of performances, you can see how brilliantly Shakespeare, such a man of the theater, at the beginning of the play, characters stand at a distance from each other. As they move through the play, they get closer and closer to each other. Shakespeare was deep into his reading of Montaigne when he was writing King Lear. In the Apology for Raymond Sebon, Montaigne develops a trenchant attack on the ideas that humans are superior to animals. But his case against human exceptionalism is bent on arousing skepticism and a concomitant hunger for the presence of God. Shakespeare takes everything from Montaigne except the point, which is Montaigne's skepticism and his longing for certainty founded in the divine presence. In the play, unlike in Montaigne, the divine has melted into air, and what might be left of it has been sedimented in animal nature. In order to achieve knowledge about the world as it is constituted in the play, we have to go to ground, so to speak, and find our way forward by smell and touch. Value akin to knowledge is found in the embodied turning toward the other and realizes the soul of the convert by that turning toward the other. The play's rejection of skepticism can also serve as a critique of the Cartesian cogito, with its individualistic claim for the mind alone as the foundation of knowledge. In the play, the mind alone is at a dead end. I've written more about this in another place. I will say a bit more about the commutarianism of Shakespearean conversion, but first let us look at how conversion works in the play. Just past the midpoint of the action, the Earl of Gloucester undergoes a conversion of kind. In the scene previous to his conversion, a scene that is the most appalling spectacle Shakespeare ever wrote, Gloucester is bound to a chair, and then after a brief interrogation and a flurry of childish insults, he is held fast and his eyes are plucked out. In the scene of conversion, Gloucester is on stage with an old man, his tenant farmer. He has had his eye sockets salved with egg white, and they have been bandaged. His son Edgar is also on stage. Unjustly accused of plotting to kill his father, hunted like an animal, Edgar has disguised himself as poor Tom, a nearly naked mad beggar. Gloucester and the old man notice that Edgar is on stage with them. The blinded Gloucester takes him for any mad beggar, not the raving figure he had confronted the previous night, and certainly not his son. "Is it a beggar man?" he asks the tenant farmer. "Madman and beggar too," says the farmer. Gloucester says, "In the last night's storm, I such a fellow saw, which made me think a man a worm. My son came then into my mind, and yet my mind was then scarce friends with him. I have heard more since. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport." 4 lines later, having recognized the beggar as poor Tom by the sound of his voice, Gloucester has evidently made a decision. He warns his tenant farmer to steer clear of him. It is dangerous for the old man to be seen giving aid to him, but he nevertheless asks for the farmer's help one last time. Gloucester says, "Get thee away. If for my sake thou wilt o'ertake us hence a mile or twain in the way toward Dover, do it for ancient love, and bring some covering for this naked soul, which I'll entreat to lead me." To turn from the meaninglessness of suffering under the cruelty of the gods to a determination to clothe a naked soul is, I suggest, to bind together membership in the animal general throng with the possibility of redemption and the prospect of creating a kindly world. Ironically, but not surprisingly, the intertext for Gloucester's conversion is scriptural. We can hear the Christian resonance in the metaphor of covering the nakedness of another. In the immediate aftermath of the fall, Adam and Eve, suddenly aware that they are naked, feel shame, cover themselves with leaves, and hide from God. God takes a moment from the unfolding catalog of the punishments he is administering to clothe their nakedness. Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. Gloucester's decision to clothe Edgar is consonant with God's care of the first humans. The reference to abject, meaningless suffering, people as worms or flies, sounds as if it might be a classical reference or something from Montaigne, but it too is resonant with Scripture, especially with the whole betting game that God plays against Satan in the book of Job. Job, the tortured fly in the sport between God and Satan, is upbraided by Bildad the Shuhite in just these terms. God is infinite, powerful, and just. In God's view, Even the stars are unclean, says Bildad. How much more a worm, even the son of a worm, which is but a worm, man, says Bildad. Gloucester turns toward what is at once a human worm and a naked soul. It is significant that he uses the word soul at this moment, even without his eyes, or perhaps because he no longer has sight. He recognizes the man standing with him on the stage, not indeed as his son, but rather as a being worthy of his care. Excuse me, the soul is the principle of care in the play, because it is you, yours, and yet not yours alone, because it is something shared. Claudius in Hamlet seeks to free his soul by prayer. It is at once his personhood and also something in his care, and something open ideally to the care of higher beings. You remember Claudius says, "O limed soul, and that struggling to be free art more engaged. Help, angels, make assay." In contrast, when Lear uses the word mind as a designator of personhood, when he says, for example, "The tempest in my mind doth from my senses take all feeling else, save what beats there," he is thinking of himself as individualized and separate from others. Indeed, he feels stuck in his own brain and body, whose beating pulse disables his outward senses. Materialist accounts of personhood, such as those provided by neuroscientific thinking or social determinism, see the person as something incapable of self-moving. For all his active machinations for self-advancement and his defiance of custom, the bastard Edmund remains, ironically enough, motivated by the social conditions of his upbringing. Lear is certainly like that at the start of the play, bound up tightly in the protocols, language, and socially determined identity of kingship. His conversion consists in his recognition of Cordelia not as a princess, but first of all as a soul. The word, by the way, is important, but it's not saying the word that performs the conversion. Here, waking from madness, Lear calls Cordelia a soul, but still disowns her. The image is perfect. Lear does not acknowledge a duty of care for his daughter, but he is also incapable of movement. He is turned round and round rather than being able to turn himself. He says, "You do me wrong to take me out of the grave. Thou art a soul in bliss, but I am bound upon a wheel of fire that mine own tears do scald like molten lead." The conversional movement comes toward the end of the scene, in a moment of public recognition and naming of the other. Lear says, "Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child, Cordelia." We might think that these moments of turning toward the other amount to a kind of world-creating poesis, the creation of a transcendent realm from the bottom up, so to speak. And indeed, we can discern how the play enhances the value of the person by way of its conversional commutarianism. But Shakespeare remains psychologically and philosophically naturalist. I mean that while Lear makes his soul real by virtue of his turning toward his child Cordelia, he does not thereby achieve any purchase on salvation or immortality. He retains much of the manipulative, egotistical, and violent character he had at the outset of the play. And the play world remains trenchantly bereft of evidence of anything outside of or above the lives of the human animals, who, along with a host of other animals, dogs, rats, horses, and many others, populate Lear's ancient Britain and survive the death of Cordelia. Shakespeare sets the stage for Lear's conversion when Edgar appears as a version of the scourged Christ in the storm. Edgar acts the part of the unaccommodated naked man, poor Tom, to a royal audience member who feels the performance so deeply that he attempts to strip himself bare of all the pieces and products of animals, silk, wool, and hide, so as to uncover his own animal nakedness. Like Edgar's father, after him, the king turns toward the naked man. He says, "Thou wert better in thy grave than to answer with thy uncovered body this extremity of the skies. Is man no more than this? Consider him well. Thou owest the worm no silk, the beast no hide, the sheep no wool, the cat no perfume. Thou art the thing itself. An accommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare, forked animal as thou art. Off, Off you lendings, come unbutton here. The poor, bare, forked animal that Lear would reveal by his own unbuttoning represents the ground zero of the play's revelation of the animality and mortality of humankind. But the body that turns to another is also the starting point for a new argument about the value of the embodied conversional human being. Since on the play's account, our minds lock us inside ourselves, while our ensoulment, itself realized by the exercise of kindness, frees us to move in and for ourselves, we might say that the play's key philosophical claim is an anticipatory critical reformation of the Cartesian cogito. Not I think, but rather I turn, therefore I am. 4. Converting Caliban. Let me conclude with a word or two and a story about the modern use of the Shakespearean bequest. Of course, it is not Shakespeare alone who redescribed conversion for secular modernity. He is joined by a host of other writers, artists, and thinkers. In part, we have misspent the inheritance by aligning our conversional practices with individualism and human exceptionalism instead of with the principle of kindness, our membership in and duty of care for the general throng. Conversion as a matter of the greatest theological, political, and artistic urgency in Shakespeare's time has devolved in some measure in the West into a multi-billion-dollar personal transformation industry, a multitude of procedures and products that promise to create a new you and also enable you to become most authentically who you are. It is as if each of us thought he or she were here alone. That is, of course, not the end of the matter. Here is a story that speaks to the remarkable vitality and continuing social and psychological creativity of Shakespearean conversion. I thought I knew The Tempest well. I've published a lot on the play, and I've even edited the play. In February 2018, we put on a 2-day workshop at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. Called Playing for Free, the workshop brought together 4 actors from the Canadian Stratford Shakespeare Festival, student actors from the Ryerson Performance Program, and a group of scholars from the Conversions Project. We worked behind closed doors for 2 days on The Tempest and on questions around conversion, slavery, and freedom. The 2-day collaboration ended with a public performance by both the actors and the scholars. The actors played 9 scenes from the play that, strung together, provided a good sense of the arc of the action. The scholars spoke between the performed scenes, each scholarly interlude no longer than 3 minutes, and each bent on building excitement and insight. This is what we said on the flyer for the show. The Tempest stands at the center of the tangled history of conversion, slavery, and freedom. Shakespeare's last play has been an instrument of conversion and colonization, but it has also opened altogether new ways of hearing the voice of the other, whether that other is, to quote Prospero, the thing of darkness, Caliban, or the cherubim, Miranda. Prospero's words again. That's what we said on the flyer. The work we did was illuminating. Deborah Hayes' performance of Ariel's recounting to Prospero of how she staged the shipwreck revealed to us the sheer athletic joy that Ariel takes in action. When Prospero threatened to peg Ariel in another tree, and this time a knot-filled oak rather than a pine, we watched Deborah's body change. Her vitality seemingly draining out of her, we saw her grow weaker and smaller. Professor Patricia Badir of University of British Columbia suggested that Prospero's abuse of Ariel, his toxic use of her own memory of suffering against her, was something that must just happen every afternoon on the island. Deborah and Ben Carlson as Prospero wove that into their performance. It didn't diminish the initial joyfulness of Deborah's recounting of the shipwreck, but her declaration came on sooner in the exchange with Prospero, and she seemed to feel despair among the mix of her emotions. She knew what was coming, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Prospero's cruel refusal to acknowledge who Ariel is set up perfectly how Deborah and Ben played their turning to each other face to face late in the play. She has reported on the state of the enchanted grieving court party, including the weeping Gonzalo. She says, "Your charm so strongly works him that if you now beheld him, your affections would become tender." Ben turns to Deborah, and he sees her. He sees that she, a spirit, has somehow acquired the capacity of human kindness. His turning to her in turn enables him to put aside his rage and cruelty and to take stock of the suffering of those who had caused his and his daughter's suffering. When she says that he would become tender, he asks, Prospero asks, dost thou think so, spirit? The spirit says, mine would, sir, were I human. Prospero says, and mine shall. Hast thou, which art but air, a touch, a feeling of their afflictions, and shall not myself, one of their kind, that relish all as sharply passion as they, be kindlier moved than thou art? The transformative exchange added to the number of conversions that I had already in mind. These included most prominently Prospero's recollection of how his child Miranda was not a burden to him when they were at sea in an unseaworthy boat and facing almost certain death. The shipwrecked Ferdinand recognizes Miranda in similar but different terms when he calls her by a line from Virgil's Aeneid, O dia certe, O most sure the goddess. All this I already knew. The intensity of the conversional scene between Prospero and Ariel was new to me, but it was no great surprise. Something that I had not anticipated learning, and that was indeed a revelation to me, was Antoine Yared's performance of The Isle is Full of Noises speech. In the workshop, he played it as a triumphing over Stefano and Trinculo, his easy familiarity with the invisible music making against their abject terror. That was just fine and not at all unexpected, but then something happened that changed everything. I'd agreed with Professor Elizabeth Pentland of York University in Ontario that at the performance before an audience, we would stage a brief debate after the scene, she speaking on Caliban's side and I on Prospero's. I was utterly unprepared for what happened. Antoine changed the speech. It was not triumphant, but heartbreaking. It was the speech of a man who had once stood face to face with the numinous beauty of nature, but who had lost the sight of that face and could only recapture the realization of his own self or soul fleetingly in dreams. You recall the speech. He says, be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that if I then had waked after long sleep would make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again. As I watched Antoine and heard him speak, I flooded with new understanding. It occurred to me that Shakespeare might be using conversion itself as an instrument of critique against the forced conversions of the first peoples of the Americas, a colonialist program that had been going on for more than 100 years by the time he came to write The Tempest. I understood why Caliban tried to find the lost sacred face of the natural world, first in Prospero and then in Stefano, why that was impossible to do, and how those failures had left him bound forever within inescapable solitariness. And then, as Stanley Cavell might say, I disowned that knowledge. I just did what I said I would do. I stood up, faced Liz Pentland before the audience, and undertook to rebut her argument for Caliban's humanity and dignity. Even though it was sheer make-believe, grief and guilt for what I had not said came over me the day after the performance. So I did what anyone in 2018 would have done and would do now. I sent a thank you email to Antoine and the members of the workshop. Actually, I did say thank you, but I also attached a playful, but also a serious formal petition to Caliban for forgiveness, explaining that I had learned and saying what I should have said by way of acknowledgement of Caliban's exclusion from the possibility of the realization of self or soul that can issue only from conversion. In spite of what has happened to conversion in the personal and transformational marketplace of the 21st century, Shakespeare's conversional art will remain robust and influential and good so long as it remains in the hands of artists like Antoine Yared. Consider also, finally, the tens of thousands of works of art over the past 400 years that have come in one way or another from Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is not a point of origin, he's a kind of huge switching yard. And these works have undertaken, in many cases, to develop a conversional relationship with the plays. Consider these three conversions of the play King Lear: Nahum Tate's tragicomedy in the 18th century, the late 19th century Queen Lear in the Yiddish theater in New York City, and the great 2018 novel set in Delhi, We That Are Young by Preti Taneja. Each of them not only makes use of the original play, but also undertakes to convert it, to make it mean differently, and differently not just for a moment, but in an enduring way. Shakespeare's plays are designed precisely to encourage and support rewritings. On this account, Shakespeare's theater becomes a world of Shakespearean transformations, a place thronging with multitudes of readers, playgoers, scholars, actors, writers, and artists of all kind who are bent on a conversional rethinking of Shakespeare, themselves, and their world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. We have seen Shakespeare in a different perspective. Actually, we being in India, we have read Shakespeare, we have been told about Shakespeare and also the social history of England. But when I listened to your deliberation now, I could understand that it can be viewed in a different sense also. So all the plays, all because we have studied history, but we are not able to connect it with England because that is the situation now. So now when you are saying all these things, I could see the history in a different perspective, history of England in a different perspective. So thank you so much, and that was a, a great speech that you have given, a great session that you have given us. We have a couple of questions in the chat box. Can I take that? Like you have time for that because it's almost 7:05 in India, 7:02 in India.
Yes,
So,
please.
Yeah, okay, fine. So I could see one Mr. Vikas who has asked about what made the issue of a divided kingdom timely when Shakespeare wrote King Lear.
That's wonderful. It's a wonderful question, a very historical question. As I think the questioner probably knows, King James was on the throne at this time. He had previously and continued to be the King of Scotland. He was King James VI of Scotland, King James I of England. And he had a major project, which was to unite Scotland and Wales and England into what we now know as the United Kingdom in jeopardy at this very moment in history. And so this was on people's minds. And I think that was one of the reasons that he thought about starting the play with a division of Britain into three areas, ruled by three different monarchs, because it was a kind of in dialogue with this royal project. That was an incitement for the play, I'd suggest, though the play goes in a completely different direction. Of course, I didn't talk about the play in relation to Jacobean political policy, but rather in relationship to the crisis of conversion in its own time. Good question.
Thank you, Professor, and hope Vikas sir would have got the answer. And one more question from Mr. Ramkumar Rakesh. In the real conversions of Shakespeare's characterization, how much women power has been emphasized?
That's a fabulous question, and we have to get together again and talk about the women in Shakespeare, because the women become agents of conversion and figures of conversion themselves. I have a brilliant PhD student here at McGill whose name is Hannah Carell. Watch for her publications. She is someone who's writing about women and conversion in Shakespeare and in other plays other plays by other playwrights. But if you think about Cordelia in this play, it's traditionally Cordelia's been said to be silent at the beginning of the play. Students that I have often talk about her silence, and many essays about the play, published essays, talk about her silence. Go and look at the text of the play. She talks, And she talks without fear, very boldly and sharply to her father and to her sisters. She's a very plain-spoken young woman, something that the Earl of Kent recognizes. She's only one part of the story. There are many other women. And another thing that modern theater historians have pointed out, she comes back as the general in charge of the French army, so that many modern productions of the play outfit her in military garb. She's not a dainty, fragile woman, but an outspoken, strong woman who's going to make things right. She fails, of course. It is a tragedy. But she brings virtue and goodness back into the world of the play.
Thank you, Professor. And we have a couple of more questions, but I think the time is like running short. So I'll just put in the questions to you in your mail so that you can answer them. I can also transfer that to them.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think it's time for us to wind up. On behalf of School of English, Kumaraguru College of Liberal Arts and Science, extend my thanks to the speaker of the day, Professor Paul Yaknin, who made us see Shakespeare's play and also Shakespeare and the social history of England from a different perspective. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you to you and to your colleagues and to everyone who was patient with me as I stumbled my way through this new technology.
And I thank the management of Kumaraguru institutions, the principal, Dr. Vijila Kennedy, for their continuous support for all our events. Like we have been conducting some events for now during this pandemic. So it was a great success because of their continuous support. And my sincere thanks to the lead of the school, Dr. Manjula Bashni, and to my dear colleagues of the department. I wholeheartedly thank the visual communication department because they are helping us in the technical support for this telecast. So my thanks to Ms. Ananda Karthik, who is there with us in the backstage, and students of visual communication department, Master Rishabh is with us. And my sincere gratitude to all the participants who joined us today. Please fill the feedback form that is posted in the chat box, and you will be getting the e-certificates after all the sessions. Like whoever attends all the three sessions will be getting the certificates. And we also request you to join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time for the day 2 session on teaching Shakespeare in today's India by Professor Sharmishta Pancha from Delhi University. So you will also have a great session tomorrow. And you can also log on to our website to know more about class and the events happening in the college. And you can visit our social media pages, which is also posted in the chat box. So thank you all once again. Stay home, stay safe, and meet you all virtually tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.